everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I recently did a video talking about the baits that I like to use during some of those windy, nasty condition days. And I thought I'd do a follow-up to that regarding the baits that I like to use during sunny, flat, calm conditions, which are also some of my favorite times to fish. And it's pretty interesting how the wind will dictate the fish position. You know, when you've got those windy, nasty days, you get a lot of fish that will take advantage of those areas that have a lot of wind-driven current. And a lot of times the fish will pull away from the cover because they can't stay close to the cover during those rough wave action that's taking place. But on those flat, calm, sunny days, you've got kind of the exact opposite. You've got the ability for fish really to hang extremely tight to cover. You've got no surface action to break up that sun, which generally will push the fish down a little bit deeper or push them into shaded areas or cover, like I mentioned before. So the wind really does a good job at dictating where the fish are going to be. And if you recognize that, it makes it easier on you and helps you catch more fish. So I've got here 5 of my baits that I love to throw during flat, calm conditions, which again is kind of one of my favorite times to fish because I like to be able to see everything that's going on. You know, if you happen to be fishing a really clear body of water, you can see everything in the water. You can see if there's fish in the area. You can see if there's a big rock or a big dark spot. And I love to fish in those conditions. But having said that, it can also be very difficult to fish during sunny, flat, calm conditions if you're not using the right baits and looking for the right locations. So I thought I'd fill you in on the baits that I like to use and the areas I like to throw them to hopefully help you guys if you do struggle during those flat, calm condition days. And I'll put links to all these baits in the video description for you. So if you want to support the channel, you can use my Tackle Warehouse affiliate link, which would be very, very helpful and much appreciated. And I believe all these baits are covered there. If they're not, I'll try to find another location where you can pick them up. All right, so let's start off with what may be the best all-around bait to throw on your flat, calm, sunny conditions, and that's a Wacky Rig. So this is a Berkley 5-inch max scent general. This is one of my favorite colors, especially on sunny days, which is green pumpkin, but it's got the black tip tail. Green pumpkin works great pretty much all around, but I do like the black tip tail under really flat, sunny, calm conditions. But a Wacky Rig is really key for a couple of reasons. One, it's a very slow moving bait, and you don't necessarily want something that's going to cause a lot of commotion on these days because the fish get really good looks at your bait. So if you're throwing a spinner bait or a crankbait or a vibrating jig, something that throws a lot of flash, a lot of times that can act as a deterrent on these days. I've found that you want to be using either a slow moving bait or an extremely fast moving bait that does not give off a lot of vibration. And I'll touch on that in just a little bit. But one of the best is a Wacky Rig. You can throw this into the thickest of cover if you're fishing one that's weedless. You can throw it into those areas that have a lot of shade. So maybe you're skipping it under docks, maybe you're skipping it under bushes. That's where a lot of your fish are going to be. And it's really hard to beat a Wacky Rig. The other thing I love about this bait is a lot of times you can see cruising fish. So you might be going down a bank and you see a fish cruising down the bank. This is a really good bait to lead those fish with, meaning you cast in front of them, let the fish continue to swim down the bank, and they'll eventually find your bait. So a Wacky Rig is an absolute must for me. So I mentioned before how I like to throw a bait that is either slow or fast. And here's a really good example of it. So this is another one I love to throw on flat, calm, sunny days. It's just your Ned Rig. In this case, I've got a Berkley Fusion 19 half head jig head, and I've got it mixed up with a, what is this, a Z-Man Finesse TRD, as you can see by the stretchiness of it. Fantastic bait to use on these days. But here's the tip with it. Generally speaking, you either want to go with a really light head or a really heavy head. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll start off with a really light head, like a 1/16 of an ounce, and you get really slow movement through the water column. If that's generating bites, I'll generally stick with that. On the days where the fish tend to not want to bite, they're not actively feeding, I actually will go with a very heavy head. So when I say heavy, I'm talking more like a quarter, maybe even a 3/8 ounce, which isn't all that heavy in terms of fishing, but it is for a Ned Rig. You're talking about a bait that's got no mass, and with a 1/4 ounce head, this will fall extremely fast. So that really fast fall will trigger some of those lethargic fish into biting. So I generally will either go with a very, very light head or a very, very heavy head. The other thing I like to do with the heavy head is once it hits the bottom, that's when I'll kind of stroke it and really get it to explode off the bottom again to try to create those reaction strikes. So I find that to be very, very good. Another bait that I love to throw under these conditions is the Core Tackle Hover Rig paired up with any of your straight-tailed baits. In this case, I've got it with a Jackal Rhythm Wag, one of my favorites to throw on it. But the idea of having that weight inserted in the head gives you a really slow, natural fall where this bait can glide through the water column, suspend in the water column. And really what you're doing is you're presenting an easy meal for those bass. So they can see this from a long distance away, but it's one of the most natural looking presentations we have. So when those fish see what they believe to be a dying minnow, this is what this replicates, and therefore you get a lot of bites from those fish that are up on the flats moving around. They see this, it's very, very hard for them to resist it. So I absolutely love to fish this. The other thing I like about the hover rig is if you happen to be fishing brush piles or isolated cover that's down a little bit deeper, which is where a lot of those fish are going to be on these flat, calm days because they're looking to get out of direct sunlight, you can bring this right over the tops of those brush piles or deep boulders, whatever it is that you're fishing, and the fish will actually come up and eat it, again, because it presents itself as an extremely easy meal for those fish. So it draws the fish out of the cover. One other thing I like to throw on these days is just your small swim baits. So in this case, this is just a small 3.3 Fat Impact Kitech, just a typical swim bait. I've got it with the Finesse TUSH by Core Tackle, so it's an internally weighted swim bait head. This is the small model, not quite out yet, should be out here in the next month or so, but a little swim bait can be absolutely dynamite on these days, again, because you've got a lot of fish that can see a long distance and they're looking for easy meals. So the small swim baits reeled at very slow retrieves can present themselves as an easy meal to the fish. So I like small swim baits. I generally like to go with smaller baits on really flat, sunny days because the fish do get much better looks. So instead of throwing maybe a 4.8, I would drop down to a 2.8 or a 3.3. The last bait that I would highly recommend is a small popper. This is a Don Ivino Splash It. I like to go with some bluegill imitation colors like this guy right here. The reason I like to go with a smaller popper is, again, because it's a smaller in size, but I feel like the fish can get such a good look at it that they want something that's smaller in profile. Meaning, if you have a bigger popper, so say a normal popper, which will work as well at times, you're just going to generate more bites from this because they can't get as good a look at this as they would a bigger popper. But there's something to be said about bass taking advantage of bluegills on these sunny, calm days. You get a lot of bluegills that will start roaming around shallow flats, shallow pad fields, and they're popping at bugs that are on the surface, and that creates an easy meal for a bass. And there are not too many baits that do a better job at mimicking a feeding bluegill than a small little popper like this guy right here. And from that standpoint, the bass will eat that as well. But those are like 5 must-have baits for me anytime I'm fishing flat, calm, sunny days. Don't be afraid of fishing those days. There's a lot of people that say don't even waste your time. You fish either in the morning or late afternoon on those days. But I'm here to tell you that you can take advantage of the sun positioning, the bait choices, and really have some phenomenal days when a lot of people wouldn't expect you to be catching fish. So let me know in the comment section, do you guys have some other baits that you highly recommend on flat, calm, sunny days? Share it with us. And otherwise, hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Stay tuned. New video coming tomorrow.